Hey, what's up everyone? Hope everyone's doing well. I promised I would do more of these tutorial kind of videos, and one of my Patreon subscribers actually suggested that I would do a bit of a breakdown on my latest remix, which is Lil Bebe by Steff the Campo and Lost Capital. And I thought this was a great idea because I can show you a little bit about my process, how I make music in general, kind of how I go about doing a remix. And this remix I really enjoyed working on, had some great vocals, so it was really cool to work on it. But yeah, let's dive into it. I'll play you a little bit of the remix so you know what we're talking about. So this is actually not the vinyl version of the remix. I usually bounce all my tracks to audio just to give it a final mixdown. But to dive into the remix, it's easier to show you the version pre-mixdown because I wanted to show you what kind of instruments I used and what kind of synths. As you heard, the remix is kind of based on this synth step, if you like, that I actually sampled from one of my oldest productions called So It Goes. And I have the original sample here, and it sounds like this. And I actually used a sample for that production as well, so I'm kind of recycling samples, which I think is cool. It's always cool to sample old records, and in this case, one of my own. So what I did is I took just one of those synth shots and I loaded it into a sampler. Let me load up. Where are you? Quick sampler. There you go. And I just dragged this into my sampler. And then you can just play around with the sample, and eventually I created this melody. What else did I do to it? I used a little bit of stereo spreading just to make it a little bit wider, but I made sure I didn't touch anything below like 300 hertz. It's not very wise to change the stereo image below 300 hertz because you don't want to get phasing issues and you want to keep your low end as mono as possible. But yeah, I added a little bit of stereo width. Then I added some harmony in the kind of like the low mid frequencies. Actually, it's around 68, which is kind of in the low range. But I thought these steps were lacking a little bit of nice harmony in the low end, so I added this. You can tell without it, it sounds kind of thin in the low end, so I wanted to make sure it had some extra structure in there, really, just to make it pop through a little bit more, just to give it a bit more weight. And then I did some EQing. I actually added a bit of sustain just to make the sample a little bit longer because the sample's cut pretty tight. So I wanted to give it a little bit more length. I used some reverb just to make it sound a little bigger. Use some automation to make the reverb bigger towards the end of the breakdown. And then I used some over-the-top compression and some limiting eventually. A little bit of volume shaping, just a tiny bit, just to give it a little bit more of a pumping feeling and to create a little bit more movement, just to keep it interesting. So that's basically it for the stab sound. So I use some automation just to make a change towards the end of the breakdown. The Valhalla shimmer is really good for to create a huge build up. And then for the drop part, I actually separated my bass into two separate parts. One for the really low subby sounds and one that has a bit more harmony in the mid range. When you use 808 bass sounds, it's always tricky because sometimes you can't hear the sounds on your phone, for example. Some speakers don't really pick up on those really low frequencies. So I always make sure to use a bit of saturation or distortion, just give it a little bit more harmonies in the low mid range as well. So those kind of speakers also pick up on those frequencies. So this is the mid part. So I used a little bit of overdrive just to give it some more saturation. I used the Homicide plugin as well, which gives it a lot of distortion. Not sure if it's a lot of distortion, but maybe it's more subtly in this one. It also changes a little bit about the EQing. Like you can see here, I cut some of the lows and boosted some of the more like mid frequencies. Then I use some compressing, one to just really squash it to make sure it sounds really tight, and then I use the other compressor to sidechain it with my kick drum. I'm actually talking over the music. I hope you can still hear me. But yeah, the first compressor is to really squeeze the bass sound, just to make it sound really compressed and loud. And then the other one I use to sidechain it to the kick drum. Then I actually use this tape delay, but I made sure the delay time is at 0. The reason why I'm doing this, the feedback's also on 0. The reason why I'm doing this is because it has a really nice, it's basically running your sound through a tape machine, and this plugin gives it a really nice warm analog feel, and it basically rounds your transients, so your sound gets to be much rounder and not as like sharp, if that makes sense. It's usually something that I do on sounds that can sound a little bit sharp and on sounds that I use a lot of distortion on. It's just to make it sound a little bit warmer, I guess, because distortion can make a sound very sharp and gnarly. But yeah, and then I actually did some EQing. I cut some of the low end off here, because the low end is basically provided by the other sub, which is more focused on the lowest frequencies. So yeah, we'll dive into that one. By the way, the plugin I'm using for these 808s is Sublab, which is a great plugin. You can choose between a lot of different kind of 808s, and you can add some distortion. You basically have a lot of control over your 808s. Yeah, you can change them to your liking. So it's a really cool plugin. We were looking at the lowest frequencies of the sub. Let me play it for you. So these are the ones that really gives it the heaviness in the low end. Yeah, the weight of the track. So what I did to this is just a little bit of multi-band compression, just to really compress the mid and high frequencies, and boosted a couple of bands in EQ. Use some compression, same as with the other one, just to squeeze it together. And then I use this track spacer plugin to sidechain it to the kick drum, which is a great plugin, but I should dive into that some other time. All right, let's move on to the kick drum. What can I tell about the kick drum? Well, that's right. I actually thought it could use a little bit more punch in the high frequencies, because it wasn't really punching through my mix yet. So what I did actually is I sent the signal to a bus, and I added some over-the-top compression to it. But I just wanted it to be in the high frequency range. So I used the SSL channel plugin from Waves to cut all the low frequencies. So I cut everything below 250 hertz. So it just has that top crunch, if you like, and I wanted to make sure it would really be super loud and punchy. So it would just layer the original kick sample with that really punchy sound. So without it, it sounds like this. And then with it, so it just adds a little bit of really punchy high end, which I wanted to have to make the kick drum really stand out. What else? So as for the vocals, what can I tell you about the vocals? Well, I really love these shouts, but they had a lot of reverb on them. I'll play it to you. And it was kind of clogging up my mix. The reverb was really getting in the way of other sounds, and I wanted it to sound really clean. So what I did is I added a noise gate just to cut off the reverb tails. It's a great tool to when you have sounds that already have a lot of reverb on it and you can't take it off, then you can use this noise gate just to cut some of those tails. So that worked great for me, but actually added some reverb after as well. I usually do this just by copying the signal and then adding reverb to it and put the mix on 100%. So it's basically just the reverb and the other one as the clean original sound. And this way you can use this channel, the reverb channel, to really have a lot of control over your reverb. You can put it as loud as you want. You can actually add EQ or other effects, maybe some panning, just to have some cool spatial design going on in your track. Yeah, these are great things just to have more control over your sounds. What's this? Yeah. Yeah. All right. Yeah. So there I got up the vocal and just did some cool edits. I love working with audio actually because you can do some really quick edits which you can't normally do when you use synthesizers and stuff. So I love bouncing everything to audio, and just you also visually see the sound and you can just make cool edits real quick. I wanted to show you this. Alright, this one. I wanted to show you this really cool vocal stab kind of thingy that I actually created from the original vocals. And it's something that I've been doing a lot actually in my recent productions. I think I can show you. Alright, yes. So I've been using this Portal plugin from Output, which is a really weird, freaky plugin that does a lot of glitchy kind of stuff. You can get some really interesting creative effects with it. And what I usually do is I just put it over a vocal or any type of sound that I use in my production, and just see what it does and what kind of freaky things it does, to see if you can sample anything from it. So if I put this plugin on, the vocal sounds like this. One night, we need more than one night. It's so mine. So you can hear that it's doing some really freaky, pitchy, glitchy stuff. And then I usually just bounce this in place. Like this. And then I listen to this this bounce that I just made and see if I can cut out some really cool, interesting effects. See here, it has the pitchy stuff. Yeah, for example, if I take this and put it in the drop section, let's put it there. See, I actually already added something pretty cool. It's just something that you can do to add some weird, interesting things to your track. Right, that's pretty much everything I wanted to tell you about the vocals. All right, so what can I tell you about the drums? Show you already a little bit about how I processed my kick drum. Actually, in the last video, I showed you how I make drums with the Drum Machine Designer. But for this remix, I actually just used audio, and I added a couple of hi-hats. It's pretty standard Lindrum hi-hat. That one as well. And I actually used some panning, so I panned the first one a little bit to the left and the second one a little bit to the right. just to create a little bit of interesting stuff in the stereo image. And we have the snare drum. The snare drum, I used audio as well. Did some EQing. That's basically everything I did. Then I grouped everything together in this drum bus. And I can tell you a little bit about how I processed my drums. I used this isotope ozone exciter just to give it a little bit more presence in the mid and high range. It's tricky to use EQ for that, because if you really boost a lot of mid and high frequencies, your mix can sound a little bit thin. It can make it sound really sharp, and that's something that you want to avoid. So I also use these tools like an exciter just to give it a little bit more presence in those kind of frequency ranges. I used a little bit of multi-band compression. I compressed the mid and high frequencies a little bit for the same reasons. I don't want it to get too sharp, but I do want to have like a presence in that frequency range. I make sure to compress those frequencies just to take away a bit of the sharpness. And then in the end, I just use the limiter to really glue it together. But I also used some parallel distortion. So I actually sent the whole drum bus to another bus, and I used this isotope trash plugin just to give it a little bit more saturation. I can show you, I can play it. So it gives it a little bit more crunch. I can solo this bus with the distortion. This just gives the drums a little bit more punch. The distortion gives it a little bit more harmony, and then I just add a tiny bit of that underneath the original signal, basically, just to make it a little bit more punchy and bright, if you will. And then I also added some of these vocal effects. Just give it a little bit more build up, and just to have some cool elements in there that, yeah, give it a lot of variation and just to keep things exciting. So that's basically it. If you have any more questions, if you have any suggestions on what to discuss next, please let me know. I'm looking forward to doing another video for you soon, so I'll try to do that as soon as possible. And till then, take care and see you on the next one.